welcome to Mountaineer Farm Talk, the voice of West Virginia agriculture. My name is J.J. Barrett. I'm the extension agent for Wood County Agriculture and Natural Resources. And of course, my co-host, Evan Wilson. What's up, Evan?
Good morning, JJ. Glad to be here. I'm down here in Wayne County today. It's a warm 35 degrees outside, I think, right now. I was waiting for the snow front to come through this weekend.
Yeah, we also have Josh Pepe Poplowski with us. Josh, what's up down in Greenbrier County?
Oh, nothing. Just enjoying the day. Glad it's Friday.
And remind everyone, last week we were talking about farm management goals for the farm business, and Evan's going to be put that up on YouTube for the Wayne County WVU Extension website. Hopefully he'll get that done, and we can, if anyone wants to look back for last week's episode. This week, we're going to be talking about frost seeding clovers. And I have a couple old friends of mine, Chris Penrose. He's the ag agent over in Morgan County for Ohio State. Morning, Chris.
Good morning, JJ. Good to see you. Good to see all of you.
And then I've got Cliff Little. He's the ag educator up in Guernsey County for Ohio State. What's up, Cliff?
Good morning, JJ. Glad to be here.
Good. I know that it's a little early to talk about this subject with frost seeding. I usually always say frost seeding clovers, but I guess I should say frost seeding legumes. But probably 80% of that most generally we're talking about clovers, usually February, March, but we can always plan ahead. So I guess I will start with Cliff. Talk maybe a little bit an introduction maybe about frost seeding clovers or frost seeding and why it's important as a management tool for our producers.
Well, I think there's a lot of things to consider when frost seeding, JJ, and that's number one is the site. As you know, not all legumes do well on every site. Things like fertility, slope aspect, whether we've got a lot of the residual forage graced down, how low lying it is it frequently flooded? Those kinds of things make a difference as well. But in a year like this, JJ, when fertilizer prices are so high, we have a chance to add some high nutritional quality, maybe eliminate nitrogen application by adding legumes to the stand. Great year to consider frost seeding.
Yeah. Speaking of that, as far as how much forage you have on there, Cliff, maybe discuss a little bit more in depth. I know that a lot of times if I talk to producers, they'll say, well, I've never really had much luck with frost seeding, but the importance of having that thatch or having that pasture grazed down pretty tight, so we've got some open space there when we decide we want to frost seed an area.
Yeah, over the years, I'm sure all of you have noticed that, when we've got an area that's facing south, southeast, southwest, somewhere that's getting a lot of the sun during the day, this time of year, we tend to get a lot of frost heaving, that freeze and thaw, that honeycombing of the soil. And when you have less thatch in those sites, you get more of that and more seed contact in contact with the soil itself. So I think you tend to get a little better take in those type sites. And legumes, they like sun. So those kind of sites tend to do the best.
Yeah, and Chris, what I guess first and foremost, most of our producers will ask what kind of seed should they be going out to purchase or work with when they decide they want to do some frost seeding?
Well, typically speaking, JJ, I've recommended my whole career basically red clover and in particular medium red clover. There's a couple reasons why. One is the round seed is going to have a better chance to make a good seed to soil contact versus some other type of plants that are not round. However, I have kind of changed that a little bit over the past several years. I'm basically to the point now that I recommend you buy the best seed you can buy. So if you're buying red clover, you buy some high quality red clover to go out and plant. So now Cliff also brought up a good point. If you're doing some low ground, maybe there's some other clovers that are more water tolerant. Cliff, like what is a Ladino clover probably a better one to use in a situation like that?
Yeah, you'll notice the white clovers, Ladina clovers, they do take lower ground better. That's a good point, Chris.
Yep, exactly right. So I think starting off with the clovers, spending that extra money, buy a high quality clover is probably one of the best options. And when Cliff was talking about getting that field ready, I think is the most important thing. I hear farmers all the time talking about, well, I'm just going to go out and overseed. Well, if you overseed and the seed lands on vegetation, it doesn't make seed to soil contact, you've just wasted your money. I like to make sure that seed hits soil. I'm kind of one that recommends going out and frost seeding on fields where they've been abused a little bit. This is the time of year to be grazing fescue. If you have predominantly fescue fields that are endophyte infected, the endophyte levels are low now. The quality is probably as good or better than a lot of the hay that we're feeding. Work that stuff down to the ground, get the soil exposed, as long as you're not causing environmental issues. Then it really opens things up good, JJ, for frost seeding. But again, we can do everything just right, and it still won't happen. The upside is, though, typically a certain percentage of that clover seed is hard seed. So even if we do fail this year, maybe in the next year or two, the conditions may get right for that small percentage of clover that was hard seed, has the ability and the right conditions to germinate. So we could still see a little response down the road.
Yeah, thanks, Chris. I think that you really hit on 2 points. Number one is kind of a basic agronomic principle that sometimes we forget about, and that's seed to soil contact. And I totally agree that, at least with my experience and what I've recommended producers, is you want to hit your goal, either a hay field or your pasture field, a field that has some open space that you're going to get some seed to soil contact. You're not going to have much success. So I can agree with Chris that definitely a field that's maybe been a little bit abused, maybe you've fed hay on it, or maybe you overgrazed it a little bit, and you've got those open spaces, because we know that if we've got enough open space, that nature will supply us with some weeds in that area. So we definitely, this time of year, we can overseed, and we'll talk a little bit more about methods of that, but overseeding some white clover. And I think maybe something else that we really want to emphasize is improved varieties. And Chris was talking about white clover, or we can talk about white or red clover, he was talking about, or white or Ladina clover. I like to use about 1 to 2 pounds of an improved variety of white clover in my pasture fields. What are your thoughts on that, Cliff?
I think I agree 100% with what you and Chris have said both. For grazing, you'll notice that Ladina is probably the most persistent, along with Alice White. When things are grazed tight, those hold up better than anything else. Red clover is a great contribution to it as well. If you're managing a little higher height, that'll do well. And bird's foot trefoil, don't forget that, although it takes quite a while to get established. It's a nice companion in a field as well. I'd say one other thing about legumes. If these legumes don't exist in the field, I think it's pretty important that you get fresh seed. It'd be an improved variety, like you said, and that you have that seed either pre-inoculated, already have the seed coat on it, or you inoculate it yourself with a fresh inoculant. So I think that's important, particularly if you haven't had that legume in that field in the past. So buy fresh seed and make sure it's inoculated and take care of it properly.
Yeah, Cliff, there's a little bit of confusion. Maybe can you go into whenever our producers want to get inoculant? Um, is there a specific type of inoculant they have to get for alfalfa and clover?
Some legumes do have specific inoculants, JJ, and usually the seed providers will provide you with a clue on what that should be. Sometimes you'll see bags of it sitting around at seed supply houses. Sometimes it says right on the bag to inoculate that, take that inoculant and refrigerate it, and you may find it sitting on the shelf all summer long. So those things are sensitive. It's a biological. That's bacteria, rhizobia, that exist on the root system of legumes to help them thrive. It says and has instructions on the label how to care for it, but they're not always cared for properly. So look for that seed, look at the tag, make sure it's fresh seed, see if it's been inoculated or not. The fresher it is, obviously, the healthier the inoculant will be if it's a seed coated sort of product. And then look for the bags of inoculant that go with your clover. Make sure it's been cared for according to what it says on the label. The other thing is, JJ, not all fields are great candidates. If you have a field that is poor at growing grass, poor in fertility, low level pH, I wouldn't believe that would make a great field for legumes either. So fields that are of decent fertility of phosphorus, potassium, and a pH favorable to legume growth are going to be also better candidates.
Yeah, let's talk a little bit about methods. We'll go to
Hey,
Chris.
JJ,
Yeah, go ahead.
I want to add a
Josh.
note on that just from, and I think that's a good point that, if you don't have legumes, you've taken that soil sample, you've got everything in the right direction, then you know that legumes are what you need to add. But I've had producers in the past that want to refurb pastures, and we pull those soil samples and we find out conditions just aren't right for those legumes to take hold. We get those fertilizers put down, and suddenly we've got a flush of legumes that come out of nowhere from that seed reserve that's there in the soil. And a really good example that I had be a part of, I had a brother cleared about 4 to 5 acres of trees that, we're talking 20, 30-year-old growth. That was an old field. We went in there, added everything need to be done. I told him the first year, all we're going to do is we're going to seed that orchard Kentucky bluegrass mix. And we ended up having a 50% clover mixture come up. So no clover seed had added. That was a 20-year-old stand. And because we gave them what they needed, they came out of there. So if you don't have those soil samples and you're throwing soil and you're putting clover seed down, a lot of times you might be wasting your money unless you've got that knowledge there in the background to know that they're going to be able to take hold.
Yeah, maybe we'll shift gears a little bit there, Josh, because fertility is important as far as and the first building block of that fertility program is your pH. So yeah, if you've got a mid 5 pH, it may be tough to you can throw several pounds of clover seed on there, but it may not come up. Maybe talk a little bit, Chris, about the importance of getting a soil test and some fertility management before we try to do some frost seeding.
Well, our age-old philosophies to go out and soil test, and for most of us, and I'm sure the soils in many places of West Virginia are the same as that we have in Southeast Ohio, that we're going to have low pH and low phosphorus levels, and trying to get that pH up to minimally acceptable levels is very important. How hard is it over there in West Virginia right now to get lime spread?
There's in our area, there's not a lot of. You can get lime trucked in.
Okay.
And you can go to the conservation district and rent one of their spreaders. In our little canal, I think we have 2 or 3 spreaders that you can
Okay,
rent.
okay.
So, but
And
yeah, there's not a lot of that in our area. Go
And the
ahead, Evan.
reason why I asked is I was stunned at the American Forage and Grassland Council annual meeting this week that a lot of people in different parts of the country are having real troubles trying to get lime and to get lime spread on the farms. I didn't realize that was such an issue. But obviously we got to get our pH levels up. We want it up at least up to 5.5 at minimal levels. We definitely want to get it up towards 6, and then we can start adding maybe a little bit of phosphorus or potassium. But right now, with the cost of it, that's a major issue. Everything is risk versus reward, and we have to look at with the skyrocketing costs, what we can afford to do and afford not to do. So, that's something with those of us in extension, we need to individually talk with people about the affordability of that versus what some other real financial issues may be for our producers and the availability of existing forages. But in the real world, if we can get our fertility up to minimally acceptable levels, what are we looking at? Cliff, what is it? 15 parts per million of phosphorus, to get it up to those levels. Or pH up to at least 5.5, ideally 6. I think that's one of the best options for us. Now, the other little thing you can do when we talk about fertilizing is when you go out and spread that fertilizer. I think there's a little bit of advantage if you're spreading by hand or spreading on the back of a 4-wheeler or on a tractor to potentially mix it with some fertilizer, especially that coarse fertilizer, the unhomogenated fertilizer, the stuff we commonly see at the feed stores. If we mix that in with the clovers, that can actually scour or scratch that seed coat just a little bit and assist in germination. The one thing that I've warned my producers about, and they'll only make that mistake once, is when you do mix fertilizer and seed together, keep in mind the fertilizer is probably going to spread out twice as far as the clover seed will. We have a lot of farmers that will just throw in 50 or 100 pounds of clover seed in when they get a load, 4 tons of fertilizer at the local feed store. But I tell them you ought to half the rate and overlap by 50% when you do that, so you get a nice uniform spread of our seed.
Yeah, see Brandy there. Brandy, how are you doing today? Can you hear us?
Okay, I'm doing good, and I was just thinking, I have producers in the Mid Ohio Valley too, and it sometimes can be challenging to get the high magnesium lime that we need in the area. But I appreciate what Cliff and Chris was saying about getting those aggregates in there to mix it in, because sometimes maybe just getting that rental equipment, because there's not a lot of truck spreaders that will come out on the farm like there used to be. You can get it hauled in, and then it's up to you to apply the actual lime. So did you have a question there, JJ, or just saying hello?
Oh, I saw you there. I want to know if you had any input here for the program. Yeah, I
Yeah.
agree that definitely. And I think a lot of times that we want to emphasize to producers, we always get excited about fertilizer, or the first thing they'll ask is about fertilization rates, how much fertilizer to put on, but really what we talked about, the building blocks for fertility is getting that pH up there around. Dr. Rayburn always emphasized about 6.2 for hay and pasture fields and then once you get that lime applied and get that pH up, then some of your other elements will be more readily available, and then we can talk about the fertilizer. We don't want to really talk about fertilizer price week, but definitely that is something to think about our fertilizer prices have nearly doubled or even more than that just in the last 6 months. What's your thoughts on that, Cliff?
Well, I was writing an article today for Farm and Dairy, and I gathered some fertilizer prices, and I know Chris was being conservative on his fertility, and I think that's the way you got to look at it this year. Sure, I'd love to have that pH at 6.5 for legumes, but I wouldn't be afraid to frost seed with pHs in the high fives. And the reason is you're going to get some legume growth. And this year, you're going to have to prioritize where you spend those dollars. Lime for me is number one, and whether that be dolomitic, calcitic, lime, whatever your soil test calls for, get that done, because you can't guess within a bag. I mean, what's a soil test? $8-12, and one bag of fertilizer is more than that this year. I'm looking at prices when I was writing this over $1,000 a ton in most cases for bag fertilizers available in our area. Now that is the highest I've seen in my career. Lime's more reasonable, and we have a stockpile of it here. Although several good points brought up today, it's hard to find somebody to spread it for you. It is a dangerous thing to do when ground is wet and slippy. Be careful getting that out there. And don't forget, one of the things that I've done in that article is look at the value of nutrients in manure. Man, manure is great fertilizer if you account for the value in those nutrients. The poultry litter I just went through was over $150 a ton in NP and K value in that manure. Are we accounting for things like that?
Right, I agree, and I'm I'm in 100% agreement too, Cliff, about the you know, not necessarily be conservative, but this year with fertilizer, but definitely the first step is to get that lime applied. In it's Dr. Rayburn has a really good fact sheet on the quality of lime, and when you look at um, that sheet that you can get when you purchase lime about the neutralizing power, and also your how much calcium and magnesium it has in it, because quality does make a big difference. If you get a poor quality lime, at least my experience, some that once I looked at the data sheet on it, I had to apply almost twice as much as what the soil test called for. So if you're taking your time into consideration, you're not saving much money on poor quality lime. So my experience and my recommendation is to buy the highest quality lime as possible, and even if it's $10 or $15 more a ton, it's definitely worth it. Do you have something there, Josh?
No, did I
Oh,
click
okay.
in there?
Yeah. Let's move into a little bit about methods, or how we're going to um, apply that clover seed if we're for hay fields. Chris, what are some tried and true methods that we've used to apply legume seeds?
Okay, JJ, first and foremost, the timing is really critical. When you started off this program, you were talking about February, March, and I was talking with a colleague of mine, Stan Smith, over Fairfield County yesterday. Is it time for us to start rethinking that? Are we starting to look now more towards the end of January with some of the weather changes going on and events? The time we want to be putting it on is when that soil is a little bit damp and it honeycombs itself up and back down, so that seed has a chance to make a good seed to soil contact. So that's an important thing to do. So maybe now we're looking more towards late January into February. I'm thinking now when we get towards the middle of March, it's too late. So that's one thing to consider. The other thing that you asked was the way to seed. For years I've done I've used just the old hand cyclone seeder with the whirligig. I've done that for years and that works good. We've had people put it on the back of their four-wheelers or utility vehicles. They have spreaders with that. Again, some will mix it in with those bigger 500-pound spreaders on the back of tractors. Again, I would recommend mixing fertilizer with that and then having the rate and overlapping by 50%. And then, as I mentioned earlier, even the big fertilizer buggies, you can end up mixing that in. You know, it's interesting you ask about that. When I was in New Zealand back in the 90s, a lot of our sheep producers would actually mix clover seed in with their mineral. The ground was so steep that they would actually mix it in with mineral, and then as the sheep defecated, some of that hard seed would actually make it through the sheep, and they could actually reseed on hillsides that were too steep for them or equipment to be on. And then finally, you know, I can't reemphasize, if you don't see soil when you're spreading that seed, it's not going to germinate. You can do everything just right and it's still not, and it still may not germinate. We had a trial going on last year over at the research farm there in Eastern Ohio. We did everything right. We were out by the middle of February. We tried different seeding types, different seeding rates. We saw a lot of exposed soil when we frost seeded, and we had nothing this past year. You know, I've done it on my farm, and you know, many years I've had great luck with it. So, like I said, it's high risk and it's low cost. So, is it worth trying? Absolutely.
Yeah, I definitely, Chris. As far as the application method, I've got a small spin seeder on the back of the four-wheeler that seems to work pretty well. Kind of overlap that, and you know, there's still opportunity to go up and use a hand seeder. What about Cliff? I know over at Bell Valley Experiment Station, they've also used no-till drill. Is that for hay fields, or would that be a good method to do a little frost seeding?
Well, JJ, your dad and I seeded many of those fields down to grazing corn one year, and I got the great task of reseeding all those fields. And yeah, I used a spinner on a four-wheeler, frost seeded most of the fields at Eastern Agriculture Research Station with Dinah clover, red clover, Alice white. And I've used another one called Cura clover. And I seeded that in 1997 with a drill. And I also frost seeded it, but the stand that's left is the most neglected, drilled in stand on the backside of ears, and now that Cura clover almost covers that whole field. That was some seed sent to me by Hank Bartholomew back in 1997. And that Cura clover is amazing. It has taken over a whole field back there. Very unusual clover. Spreads by rhizome and seed. So if you miss the frost seeding window, you know, drills and no-till drills can put seed in direct contact with the soil as well. They can be used after the first round of grazing or in June. I've seen stands take off then in midsummer, as those legumes prefer that hotter and drier weather than most of our grasses. And our grasses tend to outcompete them in the spring anyhow.
Yeah, speaking of grasses, I'll stay with Cliff. I have a lot of producers ask questions about frost seeding different grass species. What's your opinion on that, and is it worth your time and money and effort?
Well, early on, we went and the best case that I've seen was a stalker, rotational grazed, and this was in Virginia. Again, this is a tour your dad and I were on with a bunch of other people. Well, intensive grazer, and grazed it down to maybe 2, 3, 4 inches tall, moved them, but high stalking population of those stalkers per paddock. I mean, maybe 30,000 pounds of beef per acre. And what happened was he would frost seed, not frost seed, he would just broadcast seed anytime he moved out of these paddocks with orchard grass. And those little feet, long as he didn't over compact the soil and puck it up like cows do, and they didn't, the littler feet didn't, he had good success with seeding grasses that way. But I have never had great success broadcasting grasses. Would I do it in areas where I maybe winter fed and really beat down to bare dirt? I'd prefer to drag a drill through it, maybe scrape it out, smooth it out, broadcast the grass. And if I had a little cultipacker then, I'd run that over top of that in the spring, and I wouldn't have to do it as early as frost seeding. But in general, grasses don't do quite as well, but some varieties like annual ryegrass, if you ever spilled a little bit on the ground, you probably germinated some annual ryegrass. Oats, I mean, there's certain grass varieties and cultivars that do better, but most of our traditional cool season perennials aren't going to take as well to frost seeding.
Cliff, if I can add on and support what you're saying there, Dan Undersander, the forage specialist from the University of Wisconsin, basically suggests that frost seeding grasses will only be at best half as successful as trying to do clovers. Some work that he did indicates that perennial ryegrass will end up doing the best. So if there's any locations in West Virginia where perennial ryegrass has grown, that's the one that works best. Perennial ryegrass doesn't work good in my part of Southeast Ohio. But Cliff, you're absolutely right. He says the next best grass is orchard grass, then Timothy, and then he also suggests, as you said, Cliff, that annual ryegrass will work good compared to other grasses. So that's just kind of reinforcing what Cliff had to say there with some work from Dr. Dan Undersander in Wisconsin.
Yeah, Chris, I talked to Ben Goff, our agent down in Mason County. He said that he talked to you a little bit out at the American Forage and Grassland National Meeting out in Kansas. Is there any new information you can bring back from that meeting about forages and soil health? And I guess that's the big buzzword now.
Well, just a couple of things of interest that came up to me is the discussions on fertilizer prices. Trying to utilize them better. Trying to learn more about the availability of fertilizer there, like nitrogen mineralization is an interesting topic. How much of it is actually available. Our friends at Corteva, the company is still working on getting the final approval for a herbicide called Pro Clova. It is a product that is white clover is very tolerant with. So if we're trying to control other nasty broadleaf weeds in our fields and still want to try to keep some clovers, this is more of a tolerant type herbicide. It's basically a 2,4-D based herbicide, and we've known for years that 2,4-D is softer on white clover than most others. I'm trying to think what else some of the discussions were about, but really was a good meeting. And grazing is always a big thing. Grazing cover crops is a big topic too now. So those are all things of interest.
Yeah, Chris, you mentioned nitrogen. Maybe I'll go to Cliff. I wish that Dr. Rayburn was on he could probably quote the exact numbers, but one of the things that was so amazing about clovers, especially in our hay and pasture fields, is their nitrogen fixation ability, which this year is going to be extremely important considering fertilizer cost. Cliff, maybe you can talk a little bit about the importance of that. And I was trying to think about how many. I'm thinking of red and white clovers is around 100 pounds of nitrogen to the acre, 50 to 100 maybe. Does that sound about right?
JJ, I think somebody might be able to quote you some actual stats on that, and you're certainly right. It could go to that level or higher, but that's just a number. and it depends on the density of the legume stand. In fact, I can take a pure stand of clover and cause it not to shed nitrogen by over fertilizing it with nitrogen. Then it will quit having legume activity in the rhizobia and the root system. So, but the point is this, those legumes and clovers add a higher nutritional quality component to those grasses. They help offset that endophyte level Chris talked about, higher protein content as well, diversify that stand. So they're wonderful. They're wonderful for a number of reasons, and they can potentially, when they're 35% of a, let's say we look at a square foot on a dry matter content basis, and if legumes comprise 35%, clovers, red clovers, white clovers, you could eliminate nitrogen application. Dr. Rich Leap at Michigan State has done some research on that. You'll also find information on that in Jim Garish's publication for rotational grazing management. So anyhow, legumes are wonderful for a number of different reasons. And this is the year to really look at their benefits.
Yeah, Cliff, what was the, when you were looking up some of that information on nitrogen fertilizer, I know a lot of our producers use urea. What were your numbers on a ton of urea?
Well, let's see here. I'm going to look at my price list over here. So pardon me. Well, I got $940 to over $1,000 a ton for urea that I can buy it for around here. Now, I think these prices are going to change maybe weekly, and they're going to vary by region. They're going to vary by bulk quantity that you may buy and whether you buy it bulk versus bag. So prices will be all over the board a little bit, but speaking with the fertilizer dealers this week, we know one thing, they will be higher than you've seen in your life.
And Cliff, to back up what you're saying, JJ, I was checking prices at the local co-op here in Southeast Ohio. And if you could find bagged urea, it was $25.50 a bag. So that would put it well over $1,000 a ton. So is it worth trying to frost seed? I think so. I think so.
Yeah, I think definitely it's a low cost. It might be a little bit of risk, but it's definitely a low cost management tool that we can use. And let's talk a little bit about after we apply that seed, some of the management that we need. Definitely, I want to emphasize what Cliff was saying, that that we want to be careful how much nitrogen we're applying if we're going to encourage legume development. Over applying nitrogen can definitely set that back, and also the maybe Cliff can talk about that a little bit. I thought that was, and for as far as our pasture fields, we're wanting about 30 to 35% is kind of our goal of clovers versus grass. Is that about right, Cliff?
Yeah, that's kind of a goal to shoot for. Although if any one of you looked at your pastures know that content looks different in May than it does in July. And so what we see is dominated by grass early spring, that spring flush or growth of the cool season grasses as they graze it down and expose more soil closer to the soil surface, and then we start to see more legumes dominate into the summer. So it is a picture in time when we look at that clover content as well. But yeah, as a good general rule of thumb, that's what you're looking at, JJ, at 35% on a dry matter content, say per square foot, maybe up to 50%. Well, as you increase that content, you could also increase the potential for some bloat. And legumes aren't for every species either. I don't recommend clovers for horse people. I've just seen too many problems with disorders like slobbers, also photosensitivity. So horse owners, they're going to get a few clovers anyhow, but some horses are just sensitive to clovers.
Right. Evan, you have any questions?
I do right on that note. I had a producer here back in August, September call me, go out to his fields and look at them. They're hay fields. And I don't know if y'all can see a background one here, but that was one of his fields. It was 95% red clover. And his hay production, it fell dramatically because it went from grasses to clover. Do y'all have any recommendations for maybe curbing that type of well-established strain of clover? Or do you promote that type of clover stand?
I think we'll probably have multiple comments on that. I think I can deal with that by no-tilling in some cool season grasses into that stand. I can also encourage that grass to grow more rapidly than the clover with nitrogen application. So maybe I can stimulate that and promote a higher height within that grass. So you can work with that, but that's higher than we need for a level of clover in a stand. Chris, you probably have some thoughts on that too.
And I think, given time, it'll likely start thinning out. I like what Cliff said. If you're going to fertilize, instead of, for example, using what we typically use here in Southeast Ohio, a 923/30 fertilizer, where you are trying to encourage legume growth, maybe go with like a 19 type fertilizer, if you're trying to get yield. But I think over time, it's likely going to thin itself out.
Okay. He's like, yeah, my bales, I think it went from 100 to 75 bales this past year on that field or something. And he's like, I'm really concerned because I don't have as much hay as I normally do. And here we are.
And that becomes the problem. You have an extremely high quality hay. And this happened to me last year.
Yeah.
I had the best hay that I ever put up. I thought I had enough, but the dirty little secret is my cows were eating it like cotton candy. Most years my cows eat hay that's like newspaper. They fill up and they can't digest it. But last year it was so good, it was like cotton candy, and they were going through it faster than I've ever seen in my life. So yeah, that could be the problem too, Evan, is that, he's also going to have some really high quality stuff.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's interesting, Chris. Several years ago, my uncle had they were low on hay and they purchased some Western alfalfa hay. Like you were saying, it was really fine leafed, high quality, but not a lot of effective fiber in there. So, of course, those cows would, the outside of their mouth would be bright green. And they were, a lot of that, my uncle was saying that they were really eating a lot of it, going through a lot of hay, but weren't really doing that much better as far as body condition. And I think, that a little effective fiber may have helped that situation out, that
Yep.
A lot of the feed was just passing right through. Does that sound about right, Cliff?
Oh yeah, it was better than they needed. Not enough high fiber content. And you really, JJ, notice that if you raise animals long enough and have an alfalfa field next to a barn somewhere, sooner or later they're going to bust through the fence and get in that field. Well, what do? If they haven't been in it for a while, they nip it. They hit the leaf tips, the most tenderest spots of it, and you're likely, if you don't have one, die of bloat. And that's simply because they've got a frothy gas bloat, they've got low fiber and a rapid and different change in their digestive system. So that can happen, JJ. Is kind of what you saw, although you didn't say you saw any animals die. Legumes can be dangerous, and even that clover stand we're looking at there in Evan's picture, that's a high nutritional content and potential for bloat, particularly if animals got out on it and they came out of a barn eating some of Chris's hay he said he grew 2 years ago, and then get introduced to that. So be careful of any kind of rapid changes in these ruminant animals to their digestive system.
And that was my main concern when I got out there and saw the percentage of clover in the field. Like, you're probably gonna have some bloat issues down the road if you don't watch out what you're doing here.
So Evan, that picture and those topics bring up a good point as far as we can change our own management techniques to either increase that clover percentage or decrease that clover percentage. But while we change our management techniques, sometimes that environment changes on us as well. So Roger Nestor used to always talk about clover years, and you'd have those years, especially, you get those real rainy summers, and it seems like the clover comes out of nowhere. And suddenly what was a, 30% clover mix within that pasture becomes, it seems like we're overran with it, where we've got more clover than we got grass. And so, the next year comes and that environment changes, and maybe we change our management technique. Suddenly that clover is no longer an issue.
Joshua, I've seen that over my entire career too, my whole life of farming. Yeah, you've got those clover years, you have the non-clover years. Cliff mentioned it earlier. I see the percentage of grass to clovers change during the season on my farm and clientele farm. So there's an awful lot of that happens. JJ, before we end, I also wanted to mention one other thing on frost seeding clovers. Looking at Evan's picture there, reminded me, is once you do a frost seeding and you think that you're starting to see some germination and growth, we want to be careful to make sure the grass doesn't get too far ahead of the new seedings. Grass tends to start growing before the clover seeds, before legumes do. So it almost goes counterintuitive. But if you can go do a light grazing of the grass, once that clover starts germinating, you're going to lose some to the pugging or the hoof trampling. But setting that grass back a little bit, I think, will encourage some of that clover growth and actually compensate for not doing anything at all. So just kind of keep that in the back of your mind as something else, another tool we can try to use to encourage that clover growth. And then actually, after it gets established and gets started, I think that's the best time to fertilize it. Because if we fertilize along with the clover seed, we're going to be fertilizing and encourage growth of what's already there and make for more competition. But if we could hold off fertilizing till after that clover gets established and do a low nitrogen type fertilizer application, that may help the clovers compete a little better with the grasses.
Yeah, definitely. You guys were talking about the soil testing. Here in West Virginia, we have the WVU Soil Testing Lab, which is free for all West Virginia residents. And this year is definitely really important that we emphasize to take a soil test to see where you're at as far as application of lime and fertilizer. And also, I just wanted to add on to what Josh was saying. There's definitely seed bank there of some clovers, maybe even grasses, and if we improve our fertility, say we get our soil pH up or improve our phosphorus, then all of a sudden you'll see all this clover come out of nowhere that was in that seed bank that just needed the right condition, right fertility conditions. And also, one of a saying about, we didn't talk a whole lot about tall fescue, but the solution to pollution is dilution. So, and we need to emphasize that that those toxic effects of that endophyte and fescue, even if we get 10% clovers, maybe in a pasture field, that's going to help to dilute some of those effects of that endophyte. What are your thoughts on that, Cliff?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, that's a well-proven fact that we can dilute the effects of that with legumes in the stand. Good point.
Randy, we haven't heard a lot from you. You have something to add?
Not at this point. I'm just kind of listening and agreeing with a lot of what's being said. So
Do we have any questions from the audience? I know that.
appreciate Chris and Cliff's insights and
Yeah, definitely. We want to we appreciate them coming on the program, and of course, we get to that point in our Mountaineer Farm Talk that we have to ask, you know, my dad always said that there's two types of music, country and western. So I'll start with Cliff. I know that, and you can't answer with the with what you've used in the past, but I want you to name your one of your favorite country music artists.
Well, you threw my all-time favorite out, so I'm gonna say my second all-time favorite is John Anderson.
Oh, John Anderson. Seminole Wind, huh? Or what's your favorite John Anderson song?
Um, well, that one was kind of popular, but yeah, it's probably not my favorite of his. I don't know. I just kind of like all his songs and probably the less popular ones. He had that one called Swinging. That was on the
Wow.
radio all the time, and Seminole Wind, but I like some of his less popular songs that didn't get that much play. I just like it.
Yeah, that's a blast from the past. The swinging, just a swinging. Chris, we'll go to
Thank you,
you.
Jay. Hey, had a good time today, and gosh, you all have reminded me of a lot of different good points related to agriculture in general. Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Josh.
Are we going to let him get off the hook without seeing a music singer there?
No, we'll go to
Did he list who his favorite? Josh first.
oh, go ahead, Josh.
I wasn't adding anything in. I'm not really sure why I lit up on the
Oh.
screen there. I'm gonna skip out.
What about Chris? gotta go
JJ,
to
you're the
Chris.
one, yeah, you're gonna ask me again after my answer the last time I was on this? I
Yeah.
thought both of us was gonna get fired.
Well, I'm living dangerously.
I forgot that it was getting recorded. Who was the guy that drove the semi and Smokey and the Bandit?
Oh, Jerry Reed.
Jerry Reed. There you go. Jerry Reed and Convoy.
Jerry Reed. I don't know. I don't know. I don't think he did that convoy song.
I
He
don't
did
think
the,
so.
I don't know who that was.
What was it?
I-
Eastbound and Down? Was it Eastbound
Yeah.
and Down that he did? That's it. Eastbound and Down.
Smokey and
I'm
the
sorry.
Bandit. Yes.
I should know all those songs. My husband has that on a CD in his truck, and every time I borrow the truck and take my boys, they have to crank it up loud. So I'm not sure that they should be listening to some of those songs, but they're hilarious.
Oh, Jerry Reed. His
He's funny.
Oh,
I'm trying to think what Jerry Reed had the one about she got the gold mine and I got the
that's
shaft, and I'm trying to think of what the other
see, I didn't want to say that. I thought I'd get in trouble with that one.
oh well
I
then
know there was something about smoking, and he wasn't quitting anytime soon. It sounded like.
what was the name? Oh, when you're hot, you're hot. But when you're not,
Oh
you're
yeah,
not.
Yeah,
Yep.
okay.
That was Jerry Reed. When you're hot, you're hot, but when you're not, you're not. So yeah, Cliff and Chris, I appreciate you coming on the program. I think we had a pretty good discussion about frost seeding. It's definitely with our fertilizer prices. I think that it would be worth the risk to try to do that for this January,
Yeah.
February.
Yeah, and I think here in the next couple of weeks, if the conditions are right, it may be time to do it. But
Okay.
JJ, yeah, I'm glad to be on today. I know I've spent the past couple of weeks prepping for this presentation today,
Did
so glad to get to do it. So
Well, let's start with Cliff. Can you do a summary, maybe two or three points you want to emphasize for frost seeding for some of our producers?
Yeah, I was
Take
just
home points.
about that. So decent fertility on those fields. If it goes good grass, maybe it'll grow good legumes, well drained, catching the sun. Forage residual height on there, keep it to a minimum. Graze it up until that time of germination. Lime, in terms of the nutrients we've talked about today, I'd have to put correcting pH as number one in my fertility program. Management was brought up today, and boy, what an important point that is. Manage for what you want. Think about that. Don't just look at what you got and say, oh my, manage for what you want. Makes a difference. And that was brought up today. So I think if I had to cap it off, JJ, those are the major points I'd bring out. Thank you.
Okay, we'll go to Chris. Take home points.
My take home points is look for exposed soil. Make sure that there's still freezing and thawing going on. Typically recommend 2 to 10 pounds of an improved medium red clover. I'm more towards 10 pounds if you only do it once every 5 or so years. If you're doing it every couple years, maybe 2 pounds. And then if you see it germinating and starting to come up, then maybe do a light grazing on it. And hopefully you'll have a good stand.
Good. Said I appreciate everyone tuning in. Thank
JJ, I want to add one last
go ahead.
thing in there.
Yeah, go ahead.
If our producers spend as half the time they spend looking at EPDs for bulls and our breeding stock as much as we do looking at those forage varieties to see what the persistence is, look at the forage variety trials that are out there, they would be a lot happier with what they got in the field. So not all those seeds are created equal, and you get what you pay for with some of them. So, spend the time, go to the University of Kentucky, look at some of those variety trials, see what the data shows, and make your selections based on what the data shows you there.
Okay, I agree. Also, I just want to remind everyone that the programs and activities offered by the West Virginia University Extension Service are available to all persons without regard to race, color, sex, disability, religion, age, veteran status, political beliefs, sexual orientation, national origin, and marital or family status. And next week, our special guest will be Ben Goff and Tom Basden, and our topic will be crop management planning for 2022 fertilizer. So we'll be talking about fertilizer prices. We'll talk about how that's going to affect some of our strategies for managing some of our hay and pasture and other crops, corn and wheat. So that should be a really good, really informative session next week. So thank everyone for tuning in to Mountaineer Farm Talk, and we will see you next week.
And JJ, all the recordings from the past year, they've been uploaded to a new YouTube channel called Mountaineer Farm Talk. There, it's a little bit easier to find than on my Wayne County page. So if you go to YouTube, type in Mountaineer Farm Talk, it should be the channel that pops up.
Okay, so we now have our Mountaineer Farm Talk. We have our own channel on YouTube, so we have hit the big time. Is that right, Evan?
I wouldn't say big time, but we're on there, easier to find for people.
Okay, all of our previous episodes. Okay, thank everyone again and have a good week.
Bye-bye.
Take care. Thanks.
Thank you, everybody. Enjoyed it.